Hello, my name is Kevin Howard, and I am the host of Breadcrumbs, a podcast for people who know it's not working. I am so happy to be talking to you today. By the time I release this episode, it will be New Year's Eve, the final day of 2025. And oh, what a year it was. In last week's episode, we discussed 2025, the year we realize it's not working. This episode, we're going to talk about how do we get from the dystopia that we've all been experiencing in our current society to a society that serves all of us, to where we'd like to go. How do we proceed from 2025 into 2026 in a way that's meaningful and actually builds us some hope that we can live a better life than the lives that we're living today? Okay, so with that focus, the theme of today's conversation is going to be why the change I seek begins with me. Because this is the area that we can control. There's a lot going on out there. It's a big world. These are big problems. These are big challenges. There's millions and billions of people. We can't control that, but we can control the person in our mirror. So we'll begin there. Now, like with all of our conversations, we start, we frame the whole discussion not by the things that make us different, not by the uniforms that we wear. I'm a black man. Not by the politics or the products that we identify with. We are going to start this conversation drawing on the wellspring of our shared experiences, things that we've gone through together because we happen to live and grew up here in the United States, and our shared humanity, which for those of you who didn't grow up in the United States and are joining our conversation, welcome, right? We all share a common humanity. And so it gives us so much common value experience that we can use that as the basis for relating to each other. And that's how we frame the conversations here on Breadcrumbs. So, as I try to remind you each week, as I share my journey path to address the question, why does change begin with the person in my mirror, me? I'm going to share part of my journey path that's relevant to that question. And what I'm doing is inviting you to share, to think about your journey path, to think about the things that are common in what I'm saying in my journey path, so that we have a basis for relating, a basis for ascertaining whether what I'm saying resonates with your actual experience. Because it's on the basis of this mutual resonance that we know what's true for each of us. So trust what resonates. And for the stuff that doesn't make sense, don't throw it away. Store it. Save it for later because you're going to have additional experiences just like I have additional experiences. And those things may start to make sense as you experience different things in your life. And there you have it. So that's how we're going to have this conversation. Let us begin. A wise woman once told me, and maybe she told you the same, if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you're getting. Now, the wise woman I'm referring to is my mother. And she had all these kind of sayings like that from back in the day. Okay. And while she claims no ownership, no authorship to that old adage, its truth is going to serve us well in this conversation. Because when we look around us, when we look at our lives, the people we know, the jobs we work, the things we do, and then we expand it to the communities in which we live, the homes in which we live, the society in which we live, we need to understand that we participate in that. And our participation is what we're doing, right? And so, to the extent that we are participating in the lives that we don't want, that should tip us off that we have an opportunity to do something about it. Okay. So that lends itself to some basic questions. What are we doing in our daily lives? And why are we doing it? And when was the last time that we asked ourselves, is this the life that I want to have? I didn't ask those questions until I faced my crisis moment in my life. And I've made reference to this crisis moment in episode 0 and in multiple episodes of Breadcrumbs. And it was the moment that I actually achieved my middle class American dream. The notion of having a beautiful house and having a family and your children and your cars and your boat and a good job, good career, money in the bank, savings, retirement, all this other stuff teed up. Yeah, sounds great. And I was happy to have it until I woke up one day and it meant nothing to me. Not that I was not appreciative of the stuff, but I found no meaning, no purpose, no significance in any of it. And that tipped me off. Okay, how did I get to that spot? What was I doing? Which led me to another adage. This is a day for adages, but these truisms actually matter because they give us insight. Have you heard the one about be careful for what you want because you just might get it? Yeah. Okay. So what I was doing, I had built this whole life in pursuit of my American dream, my middle class American dream. And I achieved it. And what did I find? I found that it was empty. And I didn't understand that. How is it that the very thing that you want and has aspired for and worked and built your entire life to do, you get there and it doesn't mean anything? Well, that goes to the question of why I was doing what I was doing. And why I was pursuing the American dream was because for my entire life, the culture and society in which I lived told me, hey, that's what we do. That's who we are. We are Americans. And being an American starts off with some core virtues that that from the youngest time of my life through my adulthood, these were my North Stars. These were my givens. And those virtues are, see if they sound familiar: freedom, independence, self interest, and competition. I can tell you, I have gone through different periods of my life where those virtues were my Mount Rushmore. There was nothing I was more certain that was right in my life than the notion of freedom, than the notion of my independence. I served in the military on the basis of protecting these virtues, protecting that way of life that those kind of virtues that define us as Americans had created. All right. How about you? Do you recall from your journey path being instilled from every aspect of our cultural expression that these core virtues define us as Americans? And that every story we're told, every narrative, every movie reinforces these virtues. Right. And so, but the problem is, at least in my journey path, and you tell me about your journey path, because we all find ourselves today in this dystopia, right? They led me to a life that meant nothing. How is that possible? Well, it was possible because I never bothered to ask myself, what is it that I value? What are my priorities? Problem with those beautiful virtues and the narratives that reinforce them is they had very little to do with the things I actually value. So therefore, I had created a different person. I had been encouraged to create a different person, a person whose life was based on those virtues and those values. All the examples of the great Americans who espoused to live those virtues to the nth. Yeah. Those became my North Stars, my sign, the symbols, the people I followed, the people I emulated. They became a version of me that wasn't me. And that's why I found my life to be empty, because when I actually did get what I wanted, what those virtues led me to, they didn't speak to the person I actually was. Which tips me off to one thing I need to mention. We actually do know who we are. The problem is, and that never changes. We are who we are regardless of what we do. But we are capable, because of these brains, because of our imaginations, to create these constructs, to create these avatars, if you want to call them, based on things that have nothing to do with who we are, and actually convince ourselves we're that. And this is why there's a dissonance in us. This is why when we're doing the things we're supposed to be doing, they don't necessarily give us the satisfaction that we would expect it to give us, because we actually know who we are. And if it doesn't serve that, you're not going to feel joy, fulfillment, enduring happiness. So I had to go down this journey path of figuring out, who am I? And how did I get to because now I know how I got to the spot. And so this crisis moment for me occurred in 2007. Now, for the next 9 years, I went down this exploration path. It doesn't have to take you 9 years. You get the benefit of my experience, right? I'm sharing it, and you can again relate it, and then you hopefully you'll do the shorthand version, right? But I had built a successful life by external measures, nothing to do with Kevin Howard. And I achieved the American middle class dream, right? But it wasn't what I wanted, as it turns out. So what I then did was ask myself, what is it that I want? How can I answer that question? Because the funny thing about it is, I hadn't asked my question. It took me 42 years of my life to ask that question. I never had asked my question, what does Kevin Howard want? I was already told from the time I was a child what's good and what's bad, what's normal and what's weird. You know, I had already been socialized, and the culture had been hardwired in me to live a life of those four virtues. And look at the best examples, that the best leaders that our society had as role models for how to model those virtues in real life. And that's all I had. So, okay. So I didn't know how to answer the question. But that leads us to the first breadcrumb. We can answer what we value by doing an inventory of our actual lived experiences. Because as I said to you, we do know who we are. We are always who we are. The difference is that we can get in our heads that we're someone else based on what other people tell us. And so therefore, how we live our actual experiences and how we enjoy them or don't enjoy them literally is an expression of the person we actually are experiencing this avatar life, this thing that's different. And to the extent that it can make us happy It does. And to the extent that it makes us completely miserable, it does. So by looking at what our lived experiences are, we can ascertain, okay, what gave me the greatest joy? What was I doing that really lit me up, that made me excited? What was the ultimate? And what gave me the deepest pains, the frightening moments? What was the worst of times? And what was going on that led to that? And then to understand all the emotions in between those experiences. Because we can all do that. We can look at our life experiences. And the easier part is to remember the extremes, the highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows. Everything in between, you can draw on your more recent memories because that is what the day to day is. Usually, every day does not have the ultimate in either direction. And so you have plenty of inventory in your recent memory to look at, that expresses the in between motions of what gives you different gradations of happiness, satisfaction, boredom, or what have you. Okay. So I started down that journey path of figuring out what is it that I value? What are my priorities? Because once you start discovering based on your lived experiences the things that give you the most satisfaction, and then a little bit less satisfaction, a little bit less satisfaction, and then you flip over into the oh my god, I don't like that. I'm like, yeah, I'm indifferent, and I hate that. No, that's the worst ever. Okay, all that, right? That becomes your priorities, because obviously you don't want any of the worst ever. If you can, if you can avoid that, right? But you want as much of the best ever as you can get. Okay, so this is how it formulates your priorities. So when I went through, and it took me a couple of years to really go through my background and experiences, I found one persistent thing that was consistent, the happiest of happies, the joy of joys, was when I connected deeply with someone or something. And I like to refer to this as oneness. And yes, it's going to sound woo woo or whatever, but it's actually a part. Again, this is all steeped out of practical experience. And you tell me if you haven't experienced this too. I wrote a commentary in my published book, Onward at Last, the 2024 presidential election edition. I wrote a commentary in there called Us, and it talks about oneness. It says the most euphoric experience that we have in this life is when we are one. And I layered it in the physical, and we're adults here, so I'm not going to say anything to scare the kids, but the ultimate physical experience literally is when we have an orgasm. Can we be adult about that? Okay. And if you know of a more ultimate physical experience than an orgasm, put it in the notes for this podcast. Okay. Now, the most ultimate oneness of emotionally is when we are in love. When you have met the person that, I mean, everything else fades away, and the sun shines and here it is, that person. Yeah, that's love. That's an emotional oneness where you feel better the closer you are, and you feel worse the further you get. Yeah, that's emotional oneness. And spiritual oneness, which comes out of living a life that means something to you, a life that actually is serving you, right? A life that gives you purpose. How you feel in that context is called fulfillment, right? And so the common thread that I found when I inventoried my experience, my lived experiences, and I'm asking you to do the same, is there's nothing that felt better than when I found deep connection with someone or something. It literally could be going through a pristine natural setting walking, not thinking about the busy life that we live, but just being present in the moment and hearing the bird song, the wind bristling the leaves, and the river flowing, and all those natural sounds. It could be an immersion in nature, or it can be having coffee with your lovey dovey, which I do every morning. Yeah, me and my lovey dovey. Sometimes we don't talk. We just sit there and we commune together. Or it could be you going for a long run or walk with your dog, or just playing with a little string with your cat. But when you are immersed in that connection, mm, to me, that's the ultimate that I feel. Okay, so that's why I discovered inventorying my lived experiences. On the flip side, what I discovered was the thing that, I mean, literally nails on a chalkboard, I have to turn away. The kind of stuff that makes me so damn angry is senseless suffering. And the tragedy of the dystopia we live in, and I will say this in historical context, I believe that historians will look back at the last 50 years and say it's worse than medievalism. And you know why? Because almost all the suffering, all the tragic deaths, all the degraded lives, all the crushed dreams were unnecessary, were due to gluttony, selfishness, vitriol. We had the capability of eliminating almost all of it. It had nothing to do with a lack of resource. It had nothing to do with a lack of innovation and technology. We literally withhold what we're capable of doing on behalf of each other so that some people would get it and some people would not. And so, growing up here in the United States, growing up in a context where for most of my life, we were by far the richest nation on earth, right? To see the magnitude of the suffering amongst the absolute opulence, right? Yeah, that is gut wrenchingly tragic to me, painful to me. So, the lowest of the lowest, the worst feeling that I've experienced is the occasion of the senseless, abject suffering, avoidable suffering that we allow to occur. And what makes the current society such a dystopia is that the trend line is getting worse. So that's my lowest of the low, based on my inventory of my lived experiences. Okay. But the really interesting thing is that those range of emotions in between, they actually revealed something very important, unexpected, quite frankly. That's why it's so important for you to do your inventory, as best you can. What they revealed is there's a difference, there's a categorical difference between happiness and fulfillment. Happiness is very familiar. We're happy when things work out the way we want them to work out. We're happy when we get what we want. Typically, I wasn't with the American dream, but I had moments of happiness. Actually, that's exactly what I had. I had moments of happiness. But fulfillment is something different and something categorically different. And it's not because it doesn't involve happiness, it does. It's that the difference between happiness and fulfillment is captured in a principle called the law of diminishing returns. And so, what is this, Kevin? I know that you may have heard of the law of diminishing returns, but you certainly have experienced it. The law of diminishing returns speaks to your level of satisfaction that you get, your level of appreciation that you have for something that you enjoy But if you continue to do that special thing within a tight time frame, the more you continue to do it, the less you're going to enjoy it. Now, if you spread it out, like you have your favorite meal once a year, now in that case, you're probably going to really love it, you know. But the tighter the reoccurrence, oh, I love to have my steak and lobster. Okay, beautiful. You love to have your steak and lobster, and you making the kind of money that you can have your steak and lobster every day of the week. You're not going to love it long if you do have it every day of the week. And that's the point. That's the law of diminishing returns. And most things that bring us happiness are subject to the law of diminishing returns. But then this is what makes fulfillment distinctive, because fulfillment is not subject to the law of diminishing returns. And so when I looked at the experiences that made me happy, and no matter how many times I experienced them, this was the ultimate. There was no diminishing returns, right? Was when I was serving a cause other than myself. Go back to your experience and see if you experience the same thing. In other words, I never got tired. The satisfaction that I get out of this is your baby, and it's the middle of the night and they're crying because they wet their diaper, right? And no, you weren't happy about getting up and going over there. Yeah, we all been there. Well, many of us have been there. Going over there, you had to wake up out of your comfortable bed, probably stubbed your toe on the way, but your baby is crying. So you go over there and you change the diaper. And you get the little bottom together and a little powder and this and that and wipe everything, and everything is good. And you put that fresh diaper on it, and what does your baby do? Cool, happy, just what you experience in that moment. You forgot about stubbing your toe. Right. Okay. Right. That feeling never gets old, because you're going to be changing that diaper more than once every day for quite a while. Right. It never gets old. Okay. Whether you're talking about your baby or literally a stranger. So here you are at a traffic light in the richest country in the world, and you see someone, we'll keep it simple, who looks like you, standing there on the side of the road with a little dog carrying a sign, please, can you help? And you reach into your pocket and you give that person $5, because instead of just judging them and blaming them for being in that spot, you actually see a human who's down on their luck in the richest country in the world. And this $5 that you got in your pocket it means almost nothing to you, but you know what it's going to mean to that person. And you give it to them. And what happens when you see how they look back at you? And if you actually look at them, that feeling, that exchange that occurs right there, this is a perfect stranger, but you made a difference. You saw their humanity and it touched you. Yeah, I'm saying it. Put it in the notes if it's not true, because then you're some sort of sociopath. Right, right. It touches you. Yeah. That is not subject to the law of diminishing returns. Okay. So serving a cause beyond yourself creates a type of happiness that never gets tired, boring, diminishes, ever. From the stranger to your child, to your pet, to your spouse, to everyone in between. Okay. So going through that inventory of ranges, identifying oneness is my ultimate. To have a deep connection with people, with myself, with nature, with animals, with anything and anyone, with a book, right, as my ultimate, and the abject suffering as and senseless suffering as my ultimate nightmare, and the understanding that the difference between happiness and fulfillment is serving a cause bigger than myself. I was able to start putting together, okay, what are my values? Well, my values came in four categories. The first one is the obvious one, the ultimate oneness, physical, emotional, and spiritual oneness. To build, to have that as much of that in my life, I know that would make a life worth living for me. Okay. The lesson of the distinction between happiness and fulfillment, the idea that it comes from serving a cause other than yourself, tipped me off to the fact that service is actually really important to me, extremely important to me. Why? Because it provides fulfillment, which was the clue that my purpose is tied to service, right? Because when you live a life of purpose, it produces the greatest thing this life has to offer, which is the ability to feel fulfilled. And that's the thing that never wanes. That's the happiness that never gets old. Okay. So service was the second category of value. The third category of value was my actual interests. So what were the subject matters that I was fascinated by? If you're going to kick your legs over the edge of the bed and jump up and ready to go, what is that? Okay. For me, I am a deeply analytical person. I just love data. I don't know what it is. It just speaks to me. And I see the data both in the written word and in numbers, both left brain and right brain, analytical and creative. It just speaks to me. But my lens is more of a system wide, macroeconomic perspective, multidisciplinary, cross disciplinary. What I love is to take the data raw and see the patterns of how they relate together, how they fit, how they make sense of this life, this world, what's actually happening. That is something that lights me up every day, that never gets old. So that's my top interest. I enjoy, obviously, to talk. This is why we got the podcast, right? But I also love to write. And so even when I was a banker and when I was a commercial underwriter for years and a credit first line credit approver for years, in that case, and it's one of the things that gave me joy, is I got to analyze the data of a borrower. Here they need to borrow $10 million to do something for their business. To make that decision and to be the first line approver to recommend whether we should make that decision, right? Because it dies with me if I say we shouldn't, right? You got to figure out who these people are and why they need to borrow this money. And literally, you get years of their tax returns, personal business tax returns. You get their personal financial statement. You get their credit reports, tri-merge credit reports, personal on the consumer side, and their business credit reports. How did the business, handle their payables and receivables and all this? Okay, all that stuff. Financial statements, balance sheets, you get this massive picture. But the thing about it is, so that's a lot of data. But if you see how it integrates, and that's what I used to love, you see how it fits together, you start to get a picture of who this is. Because the ultimate question in that case, when you're making a lending decision, $10 million, is, well, we're lending this money for some years, oftentimes 10, 20 years, depends on the type of financing. So Things are going to change. Life is going to get tough. The business might go sideways. You need to know not only can this person pay, but will they pay even when it gets tough? And even when they can't pay, are they the kind of person who will step forward and do what they can do to make sure the situation goes as smoothly for all parties as possible? Well, you can't make that decision unless you kind of understand who they are and they reflect who they are in all the choices they make. So I used to love taking that raw range of data and by analyzing it deeply, distilling how those things establish their character, establish who they are, cross-referencing it against the time frames. What if we went through an economic recession? How did they respond to that recession? How did they respond to it when they had plenty of money? How did they spend their money? Look at that credit report. Look at that tax return. We got gambling debts. What are we doing? You know what I'm saying? All this other stuff paints a very clear picture of who they are. This is why I lend to this person, because they're going to pay me back, because that's who they are. Okay. So, yes, my skill sets, my interests, systems analyst. I like to write. I like to talk, to communicate. I like to distill complex subjects to something that's usable. Look at the methodology we do here on Breadcrumbs. My goal was we're not having successful public discourse. Why? Because we are yelling at each other because all we see are the things that make us different. And therefore, we give us no basis for coming together. So I flip that switch because that's not all we are, is the differences between us. That is not all we are, is the color of our skin or where we happen to be born in the United States. You know, okay, we are much more than that. And the much more than that is actually pretty common to each of us. See, so this is a means of finding a way to communicate. That was an interest to me. That's how I communicated credit deals in commercial banking. That's how I'm communicating issues of personal growth and spirituality through my book, through Breadcrumbs, is that we have another basis. Look at it this way. And then you check out, based on your lived experiences, whether it's true. Don't have to trust me. Okay. So these are my interests, right, that I discovered. So number one value was oneness, deep connection. Two was service, because this is how I exceed the law of diminishing returns and enjoy happiness that actually endures. In my interests as an analyst, both left brain, right brain, numbers and word, logical and creative. That's Kevin Allen. And then the fourth component, I call it spirituality. But I want to tell you, I was raised as a Catholic. We're called cradle Catholics. My mom is devoutly Catholic. She's still devoutly Catholic, and she raised me. And so I grew up in the Catholic Church, 12 years of Catholic school. So the first half of my life was a faith journey. And within a religious context, you are given a series of religious principles that you accept. It's not a matter of proof, it's a matter of faith. So you accept it on faith. Okay. And that is how I lived from a spiritual perspective. It was steeped in faith. But as I dive deeper and deeper into the Bible, into bringing the principles that I was learning through the Bible and through the church into my everyday life, the more my journey led me to, it's less about faith and more about truth. And I explained that moment of transition. I won't get into the details of that here. Go back to episode 0 and you can get a more expansive explanation for how I did that transition from my faith journey to my spiritual journey, where my focus shifted from accepting on faith a series of religious dogmas, to what is true about what I'm experiencing in life that helps me to understand what this is all about and potentially what is my purpose in all of this so that I could build a life of fulfillment. That became my journey. And the interesting thing about it is, I discovered that by understanding who I am. I had never asked myself that question, and therefore I did not know the answer. So I figured you got to go to the base. What is the undeniable physical reality level? So I started with survival. How do I survive every day? And this is where I'm challenging you because everything I'm about to say, you also experience too. This is our shared experience because we happen to be human. Over the course of this conversation, each of us have breathed hundreds of times. Yeah. And with none of those breaths did any of us reach into our pocket and have to take out some cash, right? In fact, none of us did anything to earn that breath that we keep on taking, right? It's given to us freely. And it's essential because we've been underwater before, or we've been into a context where we couldn't breathe for a little bit. And we understand where that leads. Okay. So how do I survive every day? Well, first and foremost, I have to breathe. And the way I breathe, it's given to me. There's a natural environment. Okay. So I have sunlight. Sunlight is essential. If the sun goes out, everything stops growing and I freeze. Death, immediate. I don't do anything to earn that. So I once again, I'm receiving this stuff that are essential. The atmospheric pressure of this planet. Yeah, there's pressure in our bodies, the circulatory system to push the fluids and everything where it needs to go, and the oxygen where it needs to go. There's pressure in our bodies. But our skin is not armor, it's soft. And so the thing that holds our bodies together, that balances the pressure that's in our body, is the pressure that's out here, right? Because if we go into deep space where the pressure goes way down, we balloon to twice the size and it kills us. So once again, atmospheric pressure, gotta have it. Okay, but let's get even more practical in terms of how I survive every day. Who produced the food I eat today? Who produces the water I drink? Who produces the clothes I'm wearing and you're wearing? Who produced that comfortable bed we slept in? And hopefully you had a comfortable bed to sleep in. And for those of us who do, we are truly blessed. And for those of us who don't, my heart is out to you. Shame on us if you don't have a bed, because we got plenty of beds for everyone to have one. Just saying. Okay, but who produced these things? In fact, the more we think about today, you don't even have to have imagination. The more you think about today, the more you should be able to ask yourself, how many people have to do what they do and do it well in order for us to have a good day? And what happens when any of those people have a bad day? Have we experienced that before? Because I can tell you this much, you know, and I know what happens. Yeah, that's when we eat something that doesn't set well. Because someone on the route, on the 2,000 miles to get from where that food was produced to our plate, they messed up and the salmonella got us. Or the person who was fixing our brakes at the auto shop, stressed about keeping their lights on, didn't put the brake pads in. You found out when you pressed them brakes. What did that lead to? Yeah. Okay. That's what happens when they don't do what they do well. So what is the implications of that? Well, I realized the implications of that is I exist interdependently, that I literally cannot exist independently. It's just factually true. And oh my God, how dare you say that? I thought you were an American. Independence is the ultimate virtue. Yeah, except that to live independently means that you are dependent on no one or nothing. That's independent. We don't live that way. And the idea that that's a virtue is one of the main drivers of the cognitive dissonance that keeps us confused and life seems not to make any sense. Yeah, because we're chasing our tail, aspiring to something that would actually lead to our own death. Because as close to independence as we get is somewhere out in deep space without any ship, because you're not dependent on the ship either, right? Okay. So with that in mind, yeah, I live interdependently. There's a connection between thousands and thousands of humans who contribute to my life every day. And yeah, they get something out of it, and I get something out of it. And I plug in by what I contribute, right? And you plug in by what you contribute. But it's through the cacophony of all those contributions that all of us do, are able to do, as well as we're able to do. Yeah. So that means the implications of that is all those people who sustain us and this natural environment that sustains us really matter. The idea that I matter more than any of that makes no sense, which kind of undermines this notion of self interest. How do I advance my self interest at the expense of the hands that serve me? Because, oh, by the way, the people who feed us every day are doing much worse than so many of us. Does that make any sense to you? It shouldn't. Because eventually that affects the quality of your food, which it is doing, which, oh, by the way, is horrible. So, okay. So, so to understand the truth about Kevin Howard, I dived into how do I survive every day? And I learned that I exist in symbiotic relationship. It's a mutual exchange between all life on earth, and I mean all life. Because yes, you and I, each of us, have critters in our gut that are not a part of our body that help us digest our food. Yeah, check out your gut health. Right. We live in symbiotic relationship with all life on earth and the natural environment that sustains us. And that when you internalize the implications of that reality, it becomes self evident what you do. All those things become really important. And all of a sudden, you start hugging the tree because when you exhale the carbon dioxide, the tree inhales the carbon dioxide. Then the tree exhales oxygen that allows us to breathe. Yeah, you too become a tree hugger. Welcome to the family. Okay. So that was one aspect of what is true about Kevin Howard that I realized just coming from how do I survive every day. And I don't care how many degrees you have, and I don't care if you have no education, you can answer the question and explore the question of how you survive every day. And you too can validate what I'm saying here, that you don't survive on your actions alone, not even close. In fact, I have a commentary that says, and for my published book, On What It Lasts, 2024, Presidential Election Edition, that says, loving you doesn't make me a dreamer. Because the reason why I love you is because I don't survive without you. Because you empower me, each of you, in your contributions and this beautiful planet and this beautiful nature empowers me to do everything I do. And I couldn't do it without you. So it's not out of a normative sense of niceness that I love you. I love you because you matter. And you should love me because I matter too. And part of the reason why we are living in a dystopia right now is that we found a way to hate the hands that serve us every day. My God, what have we done? All right. But I wasn't finished with what is true about Kevin Howard. So I addressed the question of how do I survive? But I also have to address the question of how do I function? Well, keeping it as basic as possible. How do I function started with how do I exist? How did I come to exist? And how I came to exist. And you will see a pattern here. And it's in your life too. Put it in the comments if anything I'm saying does not relate to your journey path. But we exist because our parents decided to exert some energy to have sex. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. And they did have sex. And in that process, and it took energy to do it, you had a fertilized egg created. And that was us. Sperm cell, egg cell comes together. And when they come together, it sets off an energetic chain reaction of cell reproduction that stays with us throughout our lives until the energy leaves our bodies at death. And yes, we have scientifically measured it. Okay. But let's go back to that fertilized egg. Because in that fertilized egg is the it is the experiences of countless generations of humans, each one informing the experience set in their lifetimes. How much sunshine? What did they eat? What was their environment like? Just like our parents. To the extent that our parents took care of themselves, to the extent that they had healthy food, to the extent that how much alcohol they drank, how much narcotics they engaged in, all of that went into our fertilized egg. Okay. And then once that fertilized egg was formed and it started producing the cells that became us, right? How our mothers ate, what stress levels they went through, what physical impacts they were having affected how that fertilized egg grew. So you have a combination of the genetic inclination, the code that came from countless generations of humans before, informed by the actual experiences of each generation, including our parents, that gave us the latest version of humanity in this line. And that version, how it manifests, became this nature nurture. The nature was the genetic code. That fertilized egg knew all our genetic inclinations. And if it was allowed to grow in a healthy way, if it had healthy nurturing, it would produce us in a healthy version of some form. Okay. So all that information is in that egg. It's a powerful egg. It's my kind of egg. Okay. All right. So that's where we started. And then how we functioned for the rest of our lives as we came into who we were is we absorbed through breathing, through the sunlight that hit our skin, through the food that we ate, through the water that we drank, through anything we put on our skin, right? To medicines that we take and nutrients that we take. That is giving us the energy so that when we make a choice, when we make a decision, the essence of that decision is to deploy the energy to do something. Okay. And this is the true aspect of what freedom is all about. The true aspect of what freedom is all about is that each of us free to make choices. We have agency. And in making those choices, what we are literally doing is deploying the energy that we are absorbing because we're the most powerful batteries ever. We're absorbing all this energy in all these different forms, and then we make choices to decide how to deploy that energy. To do what? It's called co-creation. Right? Because we make a choice, I'm going to learn this skill. I want to be a doctor. So we make the choice that we want to be a doctor. Then we go through the process of trying to be a doctor. And whether we become a doctor is not just based on our choices. It's based on the choices of the other people who show up in that journey path and how we respond to them and how they respond to us. And we either make it to be a doctor or not, but it's influenced by the cacophony of choices of everyone who shows up in each now moment. So this is why when we deploy the energy that we absorb in the choices that we make, we are actually co-creating our life journey. And you look at your life journey and you can see the choices that you have made over time. Right? That's your contribution to the co-creation of your life, of the life you live. So now let's fast forward to where we are. If you don't like what you're doing every day, understand that the component of that you own is the choices that you have made up to this point. Full stop. Undoubtedly, you didn't decide all of it on your own. You decided your contribution. And then you had to respond to how everyone else's contribution all along the way. So it is a co-creation. But because you are a participant in it, you get to steer that train too. You get to influence how you respond. You get to change if you choose to. And this is our secret sauce. This is our empowerment of how we go from the dystopia of 2025 and the society in which we live towards a society that would serve all of us. Is that we acknowledge that we have a role to play in the reality in which we live. And it comes from how we exercise our choices. And here is breadcrumb number 2. What choices are we making that contributes to the society that doesn't serve us? Because this is what we can change. Okay, so great. I'll start with me. Before, when I was living the journey path of freedom, independence, self-interest, and competition, I was competing my took us off. I was competing, and I didn't care one bit about who got defeated. That wasn't my role. My role was everyone's competing. This is how we take care of ourselves and our family. I was doing it. I was doing it hard. I was doing it fair. I was doing it square. But brother, I was winning. That was what I was all about. That was the American dream. Right? That was okay. And you see what it got me. Okay, I'm just saying. Yeah, it got me a nice house, but not much more. Not much more. And maybe it had something to do with the price that other people had to pay. That's another podcast. But the fact remains is that when we participate in those virtues that don't necessarily serve us because they don't reflect our values, our priorities, this is our contribution to the society in which we live. Because let us be clear, the billionaires are exercising their freedom. The billionaires are exercising their self-interest. The billionaires are exercising their independence from you and me and the rest of humanity and the earth and the natural cycles, the water cycles that sustain all of us. Yeah, they're acting as if they don't need those things. But that's their expression of independence, right? And the thing is they are competing. Even if they're rigging the rules and cheating as they go, that's their version of competition. They are living the embodiment of those virtues. And the problem is, most of humanity is losing, and most of the species on Earth are losing. Do you realize because of the climate crisis, because of the warming of this planet since 1850, that 70% of all species on the Earth have gone extinct since 1970? Yeah, the billionaires could care less. Oh, well, many of them could care less. I'm sure there's a billionaire now like terrified. But okay, that said, my point being is that this is the area that we contribute to the society that we're speaking about. If you are living those four virtues the way we are encouraged to live them, then you don't feel anything for that person who's standing on the side of the road. Because the difference between you and them is you got more wins than they do. And those virtues tell you if you just work hard, you're born in America. I mean, how much more advantage do you want? That's wrong. That is absolutely wrong. That's what's competing. That's what's contributing to this society. The toxicity, the vitriol, the separation, the isolation that we feel, the magnitude of unnecessary suffering that we are experiencing in this country and around the world, right, is coming from the idea that we're competing, that we're empowered to advance our self-interest without consideration of you or those other people, that we are independent, not dependent on anyone, even the hands that serve us, that we're free to not consider how this impacts anyone else. Yeah, yeah, that's what those virtues have led us to. And so that's the second breadcrumb, which is for you to look at how are the choices that you are making contributing to the society that doesn't serve you. And you can answer that question by rebuilding your life, by recalibrating the choices that you make based on what you value, what your priorities are. So you need to go through that self exploration. You need to penetrate past the virtues that define us as Americans and find out who is that person in the mirror. Find out what you value, inventory your life's experiences to ascertain what gives you the greatest joy, what gives you the greatest pain, and everything in between. To find out your separation lines between happiness that is fleeting and fulfillment that never gets old. To find out what interests give you the greatest passion. And then to recognize what is true about you, that you, like me, live interdependently on the rest of us and the natural environment that sustains us, that we cannot live otherwise, that we do not live otherwise, and therefore that is our strength. We're all family, literally. It's not just biology that determines family. Mothers give us life, and we got a lot of mothers. It's not just the birth canal we came out of. Now that we understand who we are, we understand what we value, we understand our priorities, we understand how we exist, we understand how we function. How do we proceed? How do we take that information and start? So I'm going to share from the time that I realized who I am. I remembered who I am. So, as I told you, 2007 crisis moment, achieved the middle class American dream, recognized that it meant nothing to me beyond the comfort, right? Started a 9-year exploration of who I am so I could understand what did I value, what were my priorities, what was true about how I exist, what was true about how I function. It took me 9 years. It doesn't have to take you 9 years. 2016, empowered by, okay, now this is Kevin Howard. I started down this path. Now, I will tell you, again, I came out of a career. I had a 30-year banking career. But at that time, I had been at in 2008, I was a middle market banker for Wachovia. Okay. And yes, Wachovia is just like Lehman Brothers. I mean, they didn't go bankrupt, but they might as well have, because basically they imploded when they bought Golden West Mortgage, a subprime mortgage company in 2006 at the top of the market, whatever, destroyed the whole financial institution. It didn't matter how much money we made otherwise. That became our black hole. Okay. So I was there at Wachovia. And the impact of the contraction in financial services and commercial banking was that about a third of the industry lost their jobs 2008, 2009, 2010. By 2011, people start coming back. But most of the people who left the industry, who got squeezed out of the industry, didn't make it back. I was laid off at Wells Fargo because Wells Fargo had absorbed Wachovia June 30th, 2009. And I was out of banking until May 2nd, 2016. Yeah. I did everything I could. I got my health and life insurance licenses. I sold Medicare Advantage plans for United Healthcare. I mean, I did all these things to try to survive in that period of time. But by 2016, I understood who Kevin Howard was. I had met me. I remembered who I was. And so one of the strategic approaches, so I was out of banking all that time and I was trying to get in. I was living in Phoenix, Arizona. I was trying to get in, trying to get in. I was a great banker. I had great experience. Couldn't get in, couldn't get in. And so seeing that, okay, I can make different choices. I'm just directing my energy. I've directed my energy in this Phoenix market for long enough. It's not working. Oh, let's do something different. Yeah. If you keep on doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you're getting. Okay, fine. I expanded the scope of my vision and landed a great spot with US Bank out of San Diego in their SBA division doing small business loans. I had done that earlier in my career and I still had that skill set and it's a specialty skill set. So it got me back in. And I literally had to rent a room out of a private home in San Diego while we were living in Phoenix in order to get back into the industry. But the joy of that is I did a good job. They knew I was a much more talented banker than doing SBA loans, though I really appreciated the opportunity to do them. And so they said, no, you are a pro's pro. You can go back to Phoenix. You do not have to continue to rent that room and you can work remote. That opened up by working remotely full time for a major institution. Now I can live anywhere in their footprint because I'm a remote only worker. Okay. And so what that empowered us to do is, as our youngest daughter, Kylie, hi Kylie, you know, shout out, right? As our youngest daughter was going to go to college up in Flagstaff, because we lived in Phoenix, Arizona. I sat in the backyard with my beautiful wife, Nikki, and we decided, okay, here it is. What is it that we want to do now that the kids are going? Because they're not coming back, these girls. We'll be lucky if we see them. They're off to the races. Okay, beautiful. Well, Nikki wanted to go to the coast. Here we were, lived in the desert, raised our kids in the desert. Now we're going to go to the Pacific coast. Okay. Yeah, California, too crowded, too expensive. Love you though. Beautiful. Seattle, very expensive, colder, not as nice beaches. Oregon was a sweet spot. Less popular, less expensive, less populated. Sounds like us. Okay. So here I was, because I had expanded the scope of my looking, because I'm empowered to make different choices as you are. How do we recalibrate? It opened up the opportunity to work remote, and working remote opened up the opportunity for us to live where we wanted to live. You know, don't we've been in the desert long enough. 20 something years for me, 22 years. Nikki was longer. Okay. So we were going to the ocean. Of course, we didn't have that oceanfront money, But we figured that out along the way because we're empowered to make these choices to co-create this reality. And so in June of 2019, okay, we relocate to Washougal, Washington, which is a great little town right on the outside of the Columbia Gorge National Scenic Area. I mean, it is right on the edge of town and just some of the most beautiful country between Washington State and Oregon along the Columbia River. Unbelievably beautiful. And we use that as a launching pad to start exploring the coast because we didn't know the Oregon coast. So over an 18-month period or so, we went and spent every free time that we could to go and check new towns out. And we went from Brookings on the southern tip of the Oregon coast all the way up to Astoria on the northern tip of the Oregon coast. We went to all the towns and we got to know the area well. Right. And by March of 2021, we found our dream house, a brand new house, 2,280 square feet, perfect for us on a nature preserve on the Oregon coast, Cascade Head Ranch, Cascade Head Preserve. Unbelievable story. I mean, we had, yeah, five herds of Roosevelt elk, deer. There was no hunting allowed because it was a conservation area. Yeah, that happened because we made different choices. And so happens we found the perfect spot, the perfect timing. We got a 30-year fixed rate mortgage at 2.5%. Yeah, my mortgage for that brand new house on the Oregon coast with a boat ramp out to the ocean is $2,138. Don't hate me. I feel your hate right now. No, I'm just saying it. That was the opportunity we found. Okay, but that happens again because you start making different choices that align with your values, that align with your priorities and stuff like that, and you create a new reality. And that's what we were doing. Now, while we were on that track to find the homestead, I was altering my career. So I had spent most of my banking career as a business line banker, commercial underwriting, first line credit approvers, and stuff like that. Yes, the middle market banker, sales, did all that. Loved it. But that wasn't serving me. I realized that really wasn't serving me because I recognized that we had this global problem with climate. Climate was a thing. And I was deeply analytical as you know, that's just who I am. And took, I watched Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth back in 2002, 2003, whenever that was. It won the Academy Award, by the way, for Best Documentary. Okay. And I start digging into that. I actually start reading the reports from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the signal amongst the noise. That's another podcast. Go check it out, for why climate risk is a thing. Okay. So here I was in commercial banking, but I was financing manufacturing facilities and stuff like that. I wanted to be a part of the movement of getting commercial banking, who is investing billions of dollars. US Bank at 600 plus billion dollars worth of credit out in the marketplace. This was creating greenhouse gas emissions, and the banking industry has a role in reducing these emissions in order for us to solve the climate crisis. And so I wanted to be participant, but you can't be participant from the business line. So I took a position in portfolio risk management, which gets me out of the lines of business and into an inner bank level risk management type role. So for the wholesale bank of US Bank, wholesale risk management group who looked at that whole portfolio from a top down base, I got in with them. And that got me very close to the enterprise risk group, which is now we're looking at the risks to the safety and soundness of the entire institution. So for a year or so, I was in portfolio risk management. And then when an opportunity, the Securities and Exchange Commission was getting serious about climate risk as being recognized. The Federal Reserve was getting serious about it. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation was getting serious about it. So our regulators were leaning in and saying to the financial services industry, you need to get your arms around this. This is not a normal economic or financial risk. But it has massive economic and financial implications. You need to get your arms around it. So when US Bank, as the fifth largest bank in the country, decided to create a group to look at climate risk, I got the pleasure of being the first climate risk qualitative lead for the bank. So we had the climate risk executive, we had the qualitative lead, and we had the quantitative lead, the guy who was going to do the modeling, climate scenario analysis stuff. You know, love the quants. I was a qualitative. On the qualitative side, this is where we're gonna engage in our strategic approach. How do we think? What is climate risk, right? How do we manage this risk? What should be our strategic approach for this risk? That became my point. That was what I was leading, what I needed to focus in on. But in order to have the credibility, because I wasn't a climate scientist, I had to take and pass what the financial services industry considers the platinum standard executive MBA style climate risk and sustainability certification course, which is the sustainability and climate risk certification offered by the Global Association of Risk Professionals. And so in 2022, as I got that position as US Bank's first climate risk qualitative lead, it was incumbent on me, along with the quant, to pass that test, to get that certification, to validate my climate knowledge. Now, I've been reading about this stuff for years, but they don't know what you know until you demonstrate it through some sort of certification process. So this was my ticket. I passed it. I got my SCR certification, and that empowered me to write the climate risk management framework for US Bank. Now, I wrote the draft, and then I brought it through the stakeholder review process. Because, yeah, we had to talk to all the lines of businesses. We had to talk to all the parties and then finalize that document and then present it to the board of directors for US Bank to get approved. And it was approved. Okay. And after I'd gone through that process, I also was responsible for reviewing what's called the climate risk appetite statement. And a risk appetite statement is something that customers outside the bank never get to see about a bank. It is the bank communicating to their regulators and internal stakeholders. What is their actual risk tolerance for each type of major risk? And so we were now recognizing climate risk as a major risk that would impact the safety and the soundness of the institution. So we also had to have a risk appetite statement. How much of this climate risk could we sustain? Would we be willing to take? Right? Okay. And so when I reviewed the existing climate risk management framework, it was a very generic. It didn't say anything. It didn't have any teeth. It didn't have any guidance to answer the question, how do we gauge how much of this risk we're willing to accept? Now, part of the reason why is that the quants have not been able to quantify climate risk, to translate the warming of the planet to the impact on GDP in the next 2 to 3 years. No, they haven't been able to quantify that. And they still haven't quantified it. And there's reasons for that. And they're working hard on it because typically risk management, you have to quantify risk in order to prioritize the risk. And this is a case where we haven't quantified the risks, put how much damage, what's the probability of the damage occurring so that we understand whether we have to deal with it. Okay. And when we have to deal with it and how we can deal with it. And what's the cost for dealing with it? Okay. That's what a risk appetite statement would engage in, but it starts with quantification. So I'm not criticizing the bank for not having a substantive climate risk appetite statement because the quants hadn't yet quantified it. But we had other guidance. As their first climate risk qualitative lead, I said, okay, let's expand the scope again. And I noticed that we had the Paris Agreement, which is a global treaty negotiated during the Obama administration on how we were going to deal with climate. And the treaty has a specific qualitative goal. Qualitative is the definition as opposed to the numerical equation. So the Paris Agreement gave a qualitative standard. It said expressly, and this was based on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change recommendation for what is the threshold of the warming of the planet, where by crossing that threshold, we would have catastrophic, irreversible climate related impacts. What was that threshold? Well, the IPCC had recommended that we target a warming of ideally not more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is about 2.8 degrees Fahrenheit, but certainly well below 2 degrees Celsius, which is well below like 4 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. Because beyond that, tipping points would occur that would set off impacts that were irreversible and catastrophic. And so that was the Paris Agreement. So when I reviewed the climate risk appetite statement of US Bank, I recommended guidance from the Paris Agreement that would allow us to provide some teeth as to how we can set our strategic approach. And that is to organize our scope 3 emissions, which is our financed emissions, the emissions associated with the financing that we provide. Yeah, $600 billion of financing. To align that financing with the Paris Agreement goal to keep the warming of the planet well below 2 degrees Celsius. To me, it was the global consensus as informed by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It was indefensibly true. Right? And so when I rewrote the climate risk appetite statement to reflect that qualitative standard, the climate risk executive said, yes, that's true. That's accurate. It's bold, but it's accurate. It's clear. And then he took it upstairs to the C-suite. And let me just tell you about my friend. I'm not going to name names, but he's a tall man. And he's a good man, by the way. He came back with his hair blown back like he had just gone into the dragon's lair and said, no, they won't do that. They want to keep it opaque. They want to keep it general, just like it was. So I'm sorry, I won't be able to do that. But that tipped me off. So we're not ready to take this serious. Like we still playing around and thinking that we have alternatives, that we can decide whether to believe it or not. We can hedge in the denialism and kick the issue down the road when someone else is running the bank. Okay, fine. Well, that's what that told me. So I saluted and we kept it into this general climate risk management appetite statement. And I slowly found my opportunity and put in my resignation because I understood creating a life of meaning and purpose. What my service was going to be was to take my analytical skills and address the climate crisis. That was, to me, that was all hands on deck. And in order to do that, I had to be in an institution that was also committed to being a part of the solution. And what that demonstrated to me is the leadership of the bank at the time was not prepared to be a part of the solution. They were not going to be a leader. They were going to be a follower. And if the regulators made them do something, they would do it. But otherwise, that was it. So I wanted to be a part of an organization that wanted to lead. So I left. I get the challenges that people face in not wanting to be the first to step out of there. What I realize is I need to have my own consulting business and focus in on consulting companies, primarily banks, because that's my background, who do recognize this as an issue. It took me a couple of years to get a major client, got a major bank client, top 50 bank. That was great. Came into 2024. I had another bank, a top 20 bank in the crosshairs. Thought we were going to really do some business. It was going to be a huge contract for me. President Trump took office. I covered this in the last episode, 2025, the year we realized it's not working. Yeah, well, it wasn't working for me because I can tell you this much. My business plan met a new reality. And that new reality was evisceration of everything Joe Biden did, which means Inflation Reduction Act was going to be defunded, was going to be signals sent to the marketplace that we're going to fight this in every way. We tell the SEC not to defend new climate regulations on climate related disclosures, sent the signal to the financial services industry that this was deprioritized so they didn't need to take this issue seriously anymore. They don't need Kevin Howard if they don't need to take this issue seriously anymore. So I had to recalibrate my entire business plan to find who takes climate seriously anymore, since denialism is running amok. It's a part of the dystopia that we're experiencing because the climate could care less. It's still warming. It's still creating the catastrophic impacts. That stuff hasn't changed, even though the nonsense is taking over. Okay, so I did. I recalibrated this year, and yeah, it's had profound financial impact on me. But here's what I'm telling you. So I brought you through that to let you know, to show you through my journey path. 2007, I recognized I didn't know who I was, that the virtues that I was living was not Kevin Howard, was not my values, was not my priorities. 9 years of deep inner search, looking at my lived experiences to find out what I passionately love, to find out what I passionately hate, to find out all the emotions in between, to set up, to realize what I value and the priorities of what I value, to look at how I survive every day, to understand how I exist and put me in right relation with that, to look at how I function and to realize that I am a channeler of energy. I absorb energy. I make choices. Those choices deploy the energy. And those decisions that I make every day co-create my journey path, co-create the life that I live. And therefore, I have a role. I'm empowered to change direction. If I don't like the life I live, I can change direction. Well, once I realized that, look how I showed you, I changed direction. I changed my career path. I changed my geography path, all those things towards things that serve me. And so even if I made a lot more money back in the day doing those things that didn't serve me, I live a life of purpose. I am blessed with a great sense of urgency in what I'm doing. I am focused on the climate crisis, and now I'm focused on trying to bring climate solutions into the housing affordability crisis, because at the same time that we cannot afford to buy houses in America anymore, at least not in the middle class and below, we have to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of American housing, and we need to do it quickly by 2030. So therefore, I'm working on solutions to address that issue, to get extreme wealth to participate in addressing that issue, because it will both eliminate the worst expression of wealth and income inequality in our country, housing affordability. It will reduce that, but at the same time, it will bring the crisis to the people where they are. And once they are benefited by the solutions that I'm working on and other partners are working on, they will be locked into the priority of climate. And now we will have the American middle class and American working class serious about climate mitigation and climate adaptation because we met them where they were. Okay, so that's where I'm at. And so my invitation to you, go back to the beginning of this podcast. Come through the journey path as I described it, looking at your journey path. Take the lessons that actually resonate to you, because it's in here that you can decide, how do I get from the dystopia of 2025 to a society that would serve all of us? And how you get there is you look at the mirror and you realize that the change you seek begins with me. And we have discussed a methodology and an approach that absolutely worked in my life, that I hope resonates with you in your journey path, that I pray that will work in your life, because we are empowered to bring about and to co-create a new society that serves all of us. This is Breadcrumbs, a podcast for people who know it's not working. The good news is it's also people who know that we're empowered to make it start working. You take care. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and I will see you the next time